I cannot take you as my queen, Rosalind. King Gareth's voice boomed, shattering the sacred silence of the great sept. The heavy gold crown of Stonehelm gleamed on his brow, mocking the trembling bouquet of white winter roses in her hands. But the vows, she whispered, the cold stone floor seeming to tilt beneath her silk-slippered feet. Gareth's jaw tightened, his piercing gray eyes shifting away from her pale face to the woman standing in the bridesmaid's line. My heart and my wolf demand another. I claim Isolda. A collective gasp ripped through the lords and ladies of the realm. Rosalind's sister stepped forward, a triumphant, deceitful flush on her cheeks. Rosalind's hands instinctively pressed to her flat stomach, guarding a secret the Alpha King would never know. The silence that followed Gareth's declaration was heavier than the iron gates of Stonehelm itself. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, from the highest dukes to the lowliest serving girls permitted in the gallery, bore into Rosalind. They watched her, waiting for the aristocratic veneer to crack, waiting for tears, waiting for a scream. Rosalind offered them nothing. She stood frozen in her gown of spun silver and crushed velvet, the very fabric feeling suddenly like a shroud. She looked at Gareth, the man whose bed she had shared in secret beneath the hunter's moon just 2 months prior, when promises of eternity had been whispered against her skin. His broad shoulders, draped in the dark fur of the Alpha lineage, were tense. He refused to look at her now. His gaze, absolute and uncompromising, was locked on Isolda. Isolda, her younger sister. Isolda, who had always coveted Rosalind's dresses, Rosalind's jewels, and now Rosalind's crown. As Isolda stepped up to the dais, her delicate hand reaching out to brush against Gareth's gauntlet, Rosalind felt a physical sickness claw up her throat. It was a nausea born not just of betrayal, but of the new life taking root deep within her womb. "My king," Isolde murmured, her voice laced with a honeyed reverence that made Rosalind's blood run cold. "I am yours." The high priest, a wizened man in robes of deep crimson, stammered, his holy text shaking in his frail hands. "Your Grace, the banns have been read for the elder sister. The treaties with House Vere." "The treaties remain," Gareth interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed off the vaulted stone ceilings. "House Vere will provide my queen, but it will be Isolda. My wolf has recognized its mate. The old laws of Stonehelm permit this right." His mate? The words were a physical blow. Rosalind's breath hitched. In the lore of the Alpha Kings, the true mate was sacred, but Gareth had claimed Rosalind was his mate during those stolen nights. Had it been a lie to claim her virtue, or had Isolda, with her dark arts and whispers, manipulated the bond? Rosalind didn't wait to find out. As the murmurs in the sept crescendoed into a deafening roar of gossip and outrage, she took a single step back, then another. "Rosalind!" Her father, Lord Vere, hissed from the front pew, his face purple with a mixture of shock and opportunistic calculation. If he got a queen out of it, he cared little which daughter wore the crown. "Hold your ground, girl. Do not make a scene." She ignored him, letting the bouquet of winter roses slip from her fingers, the pale petals scattering across the unforgiving stone. Rosalind turned her back on the altar. The walk down the long, cavernous nave was the longest journey of her life. Every step required monumental effort. The whispers lashed at her like physical whips. jilted, unworthy, lacking the scent of a true mate. She kept her chin high, her posture reflecting generations of aristocratic discipline. She would not give them the satisfaction of her ruin. When she finally pushed through the heavy oak doors and burst into the cool, damp air of the castle courtyard, the composure shattered. A violent sob tore from her chest. She leaned against the rough-hewn stone wall, pressing her forehead against its icy surface. She was ruined. In the eyes of the medieval court, a woman cast aside at the altar by an alpha king was tainted. No lord would take her. Her father would likely lock her in a distant convent to hide the family's shame. But a convent meant confinement. It meant the inevitable discovery of her swelling belly. It meant Gareth's children, the heirs to the Stonehelm throne, would be taken from her, raised by Isolda, or worse, deemed bastards and eliminated to protect Isolda's future offspring. A fierce, primal instinct flared in Rosalind's chest, hot and desperate. Her hands moved to her stomach again, pressing firmly. "No," she whispered to the wind. "He chose her. He does not get you." She had to run. Tonight. Before the wedding feast concluded, before the castle guards sobered up, and before Gareth remembered to send someone to check on the discarded bride, the ancient citadel of Stonehelm was a fortress designed to keep armies out, which meant it was equally adept at keeping people in. Built into the side of a jagged mountain, its walls were steeped in centuries of blood and magic. Rosalind moved through the servant corridors like a ghost. She had shed her silver wedding gown, leaving it pooled on her chamber floor like a discarded skin. In its place, she wore sturdy leather breeches, a simple wool tunic, and a heavy, hooded riding cloak she had stolen from the laundress's quarters. Her beautiful, intricate bridal braids had been hastily hacked away with a dagger. Her hair now fell in uneven, practical waves around her shoulders. She carried only a small leather satchel containing a pouch of gold coins from her dowry box, a water skin, and the dagger. The castle above her was alive with noise. Muffled music, the clinking of goblets, and the raucous laughter of the lords echoed down the stone chutes. They were celebrating the new queen. They were celebrating Isolda. Rosalind swallowed the bitter taste in her mouth, focusing her mind entirely on the map she had memorized years ago during her diplomatic studies of the keep. She reached the iron-wrought door of the lower armory. Beyond it lay the postern gate, a small, hidden exit used primarily for refuse and discreet messengers. Just as her hand brushed the cold iron ring, heavy footsteps echoed at the end of the corridor. Rosalind pressed her back flush against the alcove wall, pulling the dark hood over her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't care what the feast requires," a gruff voice echoed. It was Kalin, the commander of the Alpha Guard and Gareth's closest confidant. "The king wants extra sentries on the outer walls. The neighboring clans might see this sudden change in queens as a sign of weakness." "Yes, Commander," a younger guard replied. "And what of the Lady Rosalind?" Silence hung heavy in the air. Rosalind held her breath, closing her eyes tight. "Leave a guard at her door," Kalin sighed, his tone laden with an emotion Rosalind couldn't quite place. Pity, perhaps. "The king intends to speak with her at dawn. He wishes to offer her a place within the citadel, as a ward of the crown. A ward, a prisoner in all but name. Forced to watch her sister rule, forced to watch Gareth love another, all while her stomach grew with his airs. The thought was intolerable. The footsteps moved past the alcove, fading toward the upper levels. Rosalind didn't wait a second longer. She heaved the iron door open, the hinges groaning softly in protest. The cold mountain wind hit her instantly, smelling of pine needles and approaching rain. She slipped through the postern gate, stepping out onto a treacherous, narrow goat path that wound down the side of the mountain. One misstep in the dark would mean a fatal plunge into the jagged ravine below. The rain began to fall in heavy, icy sheets, soaking through her wool cloak in minutes. Her leather boots slipped on the slick rocks. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but every time she faltered, she felt a strange, inexplicable warmth radiate from her center, a pulse of energy that didn't belong to her. The twins. The alpha blood inside them was already manifesting, lending her strength she shouldn't possess. "We will survive," she whispered into the storm, gripping the jagged rocks until her fingers bled. It took 3 grueling hours to reach the base of the mountain. By the time her feet touched the soft, muddy earth of the Whispering Woods, her muscles were screaming in agony. She looked back up at Stonehelm. The citadel loomed in the distance, a monstrous shadow against the night sky, its windows glowing with warm, mocking light. Somewhere up there, Gareth was taking Isolda to the marital bed. A stray tear mixed with the rain on Rosalind's cheek, but she fiercely wiped it away. She turned her back on the only world she had ever known and stepped into the pitch-black forest, letting the shadows swallow her whole. 5 years, to the lords and ladies of Stonehelm, 5 years was a mere blink, measured in seasonal feasts and petty political squabbles. But for Rosalind, 5 years was an entire lifetime, forged in dirt, sweat, and absolute secrecy. She was no longer Lady Rosalind Vere. She was simply Rose, the quiet, hard-working seamstress of Oakhaven, a remote, weather-beaten village nestled on the very edge of the northern wastes, far beyond Gareth's immediate jurisdiction. The wind howled outside the thick wooden shutters of her small cottage, but inside, the hearth fire crackled merrily. Rosalind sat at a heavy wooden table, her fingers no longer soft and pale, but calloused and pricked by needles, deftly repairing a torn winter cloak. "Mama, look!" Rosalind smiled, setting her needle down. A small boy bounded into the room, his dark, messy hair tumbling over his forehead. Arthur. He held a wooden sword high above his head, his stance surprisingly perfect for a 5-year-old. Right behind him stalked Lyra. While Arthur was boisterous and loud, his twin sister was quiet, observant, and unnervingly intense. Where Arthur had Rosalind's dark hair, Lyra had hair the color of spun moonlight. But it was their eyes that caught Rosalind's breath every single day, piercing storm-cloud gray. Gareth's eyes. A mighty warrior indeed. Rosalind laughed softly, pulling Arthur into a hug. He smelled of wood smoke and dried leaves. But warriors must also eat. Wash your hands for supper. As Arthur scampered off, Lyra remained, staring out the crack in the wooden shutters. "Storm's coming, Mama." "I know, sweetling. The winds are high tonight." "Not that kind of storm," Lyra said softly, turning her gray eyes to Rosalind. The child's gaze held an ancient, heavy weight that sent a shiver down Rosalind's spine. The alpha lineage was strong in them, stronger than Rosalind had anticipated. At night, she sometimes heard them growling in their sleep, low and feral. She lived in constant terror that a villager would notice their unnerving speed or their heightened senses and send word to the capital. Suddenly, a loud rhythmic pounding echoed over the howling wind. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of heavy hooves on the village's cobblestone road. Rosalind's blood turned to ice. Travelers rarely came to Oakhaven in the dead of winter, and never in such numbers. She rushed to the window, peering through the crack above Lyra's head. Through the driving snow, a dozen armored riders rode into the village square. Their cloaks were heavy black fur, and the metal of their armor was forged from dark iron. Even through the blizzard, Rosalind could see the crest emblazoned on their shields by the light of the village torches. A snarling silver wolf. The banner of King Gareth Stonehelm. Rosalind snatched Lyra up, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She grabbed Arthur as he walked back into the room, shoving them both toward the trapdoor hidden beneath a heavy rug by the hearth. "Not a sound," she commanded, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Do you understand me? You do not make a sound, no matter what happens." Before the children could nod, a heavy fist hammered against Rosalind's front door, the wood groaning under the force. "Open in the name of the Alpha King!" a voice bellowed from the snow. Rosalind stood up slowly, her hand drifting toward the dagger she kept hidden in the folds of her skirt. After 5 years of silence, the past had finally caught up to her. The heavy oak door rattled on its iron hinges, the brutal force of the knocking threatening to splinter the wood. Rosalind stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the comforting warmth of the hearth fire suddenly feeling like the oppressive heat of a pyre. Her hand slipped into the deep pocket of her wool skirt, her fingers wrapping around the familiar, leather-bound hilt of her dagger. "Open up by order of the crown." Rosalind took a deep breath, forcing her racing heart to steady. She could not fight a dozen armed men. If she acted like a terrified peasant, perhaps they would simply take what they wanted and leave. She pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, letting her hair fall forward to obscure her face, and unlatched the heavy iron bolt. The door burst inward on a gust of freezing wind and blinding white snow. 3 men stepped into the small cottage, bringing the bitter scent of wet fur, oiled iron, and blood. The man in the lead was not Kalin. Rosalind released a breath she didn't know she was holding. He was a lieutenant she didn't recognize, a cruel-eyed man with a jagged scar across his jaw and the silver wolf crest pinned carelessly to his dark furs. Beside him stood a massive, snarling dire hound, its yellow eyes scanning the room. "You took your time, woman," the lieutenant sneered, brushing snow from his broad shoulders. He didn't wait for an invitation, striding past her toward the fire. "We need warmth, ale, and whatever meat you have. The storm is worsening, and the king's business does not wait for the weather." I have little, my lord." Rosalind pitched her voice low, adopting the rougher, slightly trembling cadence of a village seamstress. "Only some dried venison and a half-cask of dark ale. You are welcome to it." "Fetch it!" the second guard barked, kicking a wooden stool out of his way. Rosalind kept her head bowed, moving toward the small pantry. Every step was calculated. Every rustle of her skirt felt deafening. Beneath the very floorboards the lieutenant was currently standing on, her 5-year-old twins were huddled in the dark. As she poured the ale into wooden tankards, her eyes darted to the dire hound. The beast was pacing the perimeter of the room, its massive nose sniffing the edges of the furniture. In the lore of the Alpha Kings, these hounds were bred not just to hunt game, but to track magic and bloodlines. They were attuned to the scent of the wolf. Arthur. Lyra. Please, keep your fear quiet, Rosalind prayed silently. She carried the wooden tray to the table, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Here, my lords. I apologize, it is not much. The lieutenant took a long pull from the tankard, wiping his mouth with the back of his gauntlet. We are hunting a band of northern rebels. They attacked a royal supply caravan 3 days past. Have you seen any strangers in Oakhaven? No, my lord. We are but a quiet, weaving village. Strangers rarely brave the wastes in winter. The lieutenant grunted, seemingly satisfied, but his eyes narrowed as he looked at her. You speak well for a peasant in the dirt. My mother was a scribe in a larger town, my lord. She taught me my letters. Rosalind lied smoothly, though her grip on the wooden tray turned her knuckles white. Suddenly, the dire hound stopped dead in the center of the room, right on top of the braided rag rug, right above the trap door. The beast let out a low, guttural whine, its hackles rising. It began to scratch at the heavy wool rug, its massive claws tearing at the fabric. What is it, Brutus? The lieutenant asked, setting his tankard down. He drew a long hunting knife from his belt. Is there a cellar down there, woman? Are you hiding rebel scum? No, Rosalind stammered, authentic panic finally bleeding into her voice. It is just a root cellar, only potatoes and salted pork, I swear it. Move the rug, the lieutenant commanded his men. Rosalind's blood ran cold. The dagger in her pocket felt heavy. She calculated the distance between herself and the lieutenant. If she struck him in the throat, she might have time to wound the second guard, but the hound would tear her apart before she could reach the third. It was a suicide mission, but if it gave her children a chance to run into the storm, as the guard stepped forward to kick the rug aside, a sudden, terrifying sound echoed through the small cottage. It wasn't the sound of a terrified child. It was a low, vibrating, utterly feral growl. It resonated from beneath the floorboards with a supernatural frequency that rattled the iron pots hanging over the fire. The dire hound whimpered, tucking its tail between its legs, and backed away from the rug in submission. The lieutenant froze, his eyes widening. By the gods! What in the hell is down there? Step away from the rug, the lieutenant ordered, his voice losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a sharp, instinctual dread. He raised his sword, pointing it directly at Rosalind's chest. Open it, now. Rosalind did not move. The submissive, frightened peasant woman vanished in an instant, replaced by the aristocratic steel of Lady Vere. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes burning with a fierce maternal fire. There is nothing down there that concerns the king. Treason! The second guard shouted, lunging forward to grab her. Rosalind reacted with the speed of a striking viper. She drew the dagger from her skirts, the silver blade flashing in the firelight. With a fluid, practiced motion, she sidestepped the guard's clumsy grab and slashed the blade across his forearm. The man howled, stumbling back and clutching his bleeding arm. The lieutenant roared, raising his broadsword to strike her down. Rosalind braced herself, raising the small dagger, knowing it would do nothing against the heavy steel. She prepared to take the blow, hoping her body would buy her children a few seconds. Hold! A voice thundered from the open doorway. The command carried a weight so absolute, so laced with alpha authority, that the lieutenant instantly froze, lowering his weapon. A tall figure stepped out of the swirling snow and into the cottage. He wore the heavy, ornate armor of the commander of the guard. He pulled his hood back, shaking the snow from his dark, graying hair. It was Kalin. He looked older, the lines around his eyes etched deep with 5 years of stress and a grim, joyless duty. His gaze swept the room, taking in the bleeding guard, the cowering hound, and finally, the woman standing fiercely over the rug, a bloody silver dagger in her hand. Kalin's eyes locked onto the weapon. The hilt was unmistakable. Wrought silver woven with pearls, a betrothal gift from House Vare to House Stonehelm. He looked up, his gaze piercing through the grime on Rosalind's face, through the hacked, unkempt hair and the rough peasant clothing. His breath hitched. He took a single faltering step backward. Lady Rosalind? The lieutenant turned in shock. Commander? This is a peasant rebel. She assaulted one of our— Silence, Vane, Kalin snapped, his eyes never leaving Rosalind's face. Lower your weapons. Leave the cottage. Now. But the growl— I said out, Kalin roared, his hand resting on the hilt of his own sword. The guards, thoroughly terrified by their commander's outburst, scrambled out the door, dragging the whimpering hound with them. Kalin shut the door firmly behind them, dropping the iron bolt. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kalin looked at Rosalind, his expression a chaotic mixture of disbelief, relief, and profound sorrow. 5 years. The king turned the realm upside down for 6 months. He nearly burned House Vare to the ground, interrogating your father. We thought you were dead. I am dead, Rosalind said, her voice shaking but her dagger remaining raised. To Stonehelm, to Gareth, and to my sister, I am dead, Kalin. Let us remain so. Before Kalin could answer, the heavy trapdoor beneath Rosalind's feet burst open. Arthur scrambled out first, wielding his small wooden training sword. He stepped bravely in front of his mother, glaring up at the massive armored knight. Stay away from my mama, the 5-year-old shouted. Kalin froze, staring down at the boy. Then, Lyra emerged from the shadows of the cellar. She didn't shout. She simply stood beside her brother, her silver blonde hair catching the firelight, her small hands balled into fists. Kalin dropped to his knees. The armor clattered loudly against the wooden floorboards. He wasn't looking at the wooden sword or the dirty peasant clothes. He was staring directly into their eyes, piercing storm cloud gray, the unmistakable dominating eyes of the Alpha King. By the gods, Kalin breathed, the color draining entirely from his face. He looked up at Rosalind, the devastating truth dawning on him. He chose the wrong sister. Queen Isolda. She has given him no heirs. The king's wolf has been starving, driving him to the brink of madness, and all this time, his true mate and his bloodline were hiding in the dirt. They are my children, Rosalind snarled, dropping to her knees and pulling the twins protectively against her chest. They are not his. They belong to me. You know that is not true, my lady, Kalin whispered, bowing his head in absolute reverence. They are the heirs to Stonehelm, and I am sworn by blood to return them to the king. The journey back to Stonehelm was a blur of freezing terror and suffocating silence. Kalin had requisitioned the largest merchant cart in the village, lining it with furs and surrounding it with his most trusted men. He treated Rosalind and the twins not as prisoners, but as royalty, though the heavy guard detail made it clear they were not free to leave. Throughout the grueling 3-day ride, the twins clung to Rosalind. Arthur watched the armed guards with fascination and defiance, while Lyra sat unnervingly still, her gray eyes staring toward the southern horizon, as if she could feel the magnetic pull of her bloodline drawing her closer to the citadel. When the jagged black spires of Stonehelm finally pierced the winter sky, Rosalind felt a physical weight press down upon her chest. The castle looked darker than she remembered. The banners hanging from the battlements were tattered, and the once bustling outer courtyard was stark and militarized. The air felt heavy, laced with an oppressive, violent tension. "The king's temper has grown unpredictable, my lady," Kalin warned softly as he helped her down from the cart in the inner bailey. "Do not provoke him. For the children's sake." Rosalind gathered her skirts, holding firmly to Arthur and Lyra's hands. She wore a heavy cloak Kalin had provided, but underneath, she was still in her rough-spun wool. She would not hide her poverty. She wanted Gareth to see exactly what his betrayal had cost her. The heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned open. The hall was drafty and shadowed. At the far end, upon the raised dais, sat the thrones of Stonehelm. Queen Isolda sat on the smaller silver throne. She was draped in jewels and ermine, her beauty as sharp and flawless as ever, but her eyes were darting, nervous, and hollow. The crown she had stolen looked heavy on her head, but it was the man on the central throne of iron and wolf bone that stopped Rosalind's breath. King Gareth was a shadow of the majestic Alpha she had loved. He was leaner, his cheekbones sharp and cruel beneath a messy, unkempt beard. His dark hair was longer, wilder. He slouched in his throne, a goblet of wine dangling loosely from his fingers, exuding an aura of exhausted, volatile danger. "Commander." Gareth's voice echoed through the hall, raspy and dark. "You return early. Have you brought me the heads of the northern rebels?" "No, your grace," Kalin said, his voice ringing loud in the dead silence of the hall. He stepped to the side, gesturing for Rosalind to step forward. "I have brought something else." Rosalind walked down the long red carpet. With every step, the whispers of the few lords and guards present began to rise. Isolda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she tried to peer beneath the shadow of Rosalind's heavy hood. When Rosalind reached the base of the dais, she stopped. She did not bow. She did not curtsy. She reached up and threw her hood back, exposing her scarred, tired face and her roughly chopped hair. Isolda let out a sharp, breathless shriek, standing up so fast she knocked her wine goblet over. The ruby-red liquid spilled across the stone like blood. "Rosalind, you are dead." Gareth did not move. He stared at the woman standing before him. For a long, agonizing moment, the hall was entirely silent. Then, a strange, terrifying sound rumbled from Gareth's chest, a deep, visceral growl of absolute possessiveness. The mate bond, dormant and denied for 5 agonizing years, snapped violently back into place. The king stood up, his massive frame towering over the dais. The wine goblet fell from his hand, clattering against the stone. He took a step down the stairs, his gray eyes wide, burning with a frantic, desperate fire. "Rosalind!" "Stay back," Rosalind ordered, her voice cutting through the hall like a whip. She pulled Arthur and Lyra out from behind her skirts. Gareth froze on the second step. The scent of them hit him, a scent that Kalin had tried to mask, but could never truly hide from an alpha. The scent of his own blood, his own soul. He stared down at the 2 5-year-old children. He looked at Arthur's defiant stance. He looked at Lyra's hair, the color of moonlight. And then He looked into their eyes. Piercing, storm cloud gray. Gareth's knees buckled. The mighty Alpha King, the terror of the realm, collapsed onto the stone stairs of the dais, his hands shaking as he stared at the family he never knew he had. "My king," Isolda whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "They are bastards. They must be." "Say another word, Isolda," Gareth snarled, his voice a demonic, vibrating threat that made the very foundations of the keep tremble, without ever taking his tear-filled eyes off Rosalind and his children. "And I will tear your tongue from your throat." The tension in Stonehelm has reached its breaking point. Rosalind has faced the ghosts of her past, and King Gareth has finally come face to face with the devastating consequences of his choice at the altar. Will Rosalind ever be able to forgive the man who shattered her heart? How will the deceitful Queen Isolda react now that the true heirs have returned to claim their birthright? The battle for the throne, and for Rosalind's heart, has only just begun. If you were captivated by this dramatic reunion, please like, share, and subscribe to be notified when the explosive Part 3 drops. Let me know in the comments how you think Gareth will handle Isolda's betrayal. The Alpha King chose her sister at the wedding. She vanished with his twins, Part 3. The great hall of Stonehelm was suspended in a horrifying, breathless vacuum. The Alpha King, a man who had slaughtered armies without blinking, remained on his knees before a woman in peasant wool and two fiercely guarded children. Slowly, Gareth raised his head. The agonizing vulnerability in his storm cloud eyes vanished, replaced in a heartbeat by a terrifying primordial fury. When he stood, it was not merely a man rising. It was the apex predator of the northern wastes reclaiming his territory. The air in the hall grew palpably colder, heavy with the suffocating pressure of his unleashed alpha aura. He turned his gaze upon Isolda. The false queen shrank back against the silver throne, her manicured hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles bled raw. The heavy crown atop her head suddenly looked less like a symbol of power and more like a gilded cage. How? Gareth's voice was barely a whisper, yet it reverberated off the vaulted ceilings like distant thunder. He took a slow, measured step up the dais. "How did you blind my wolf, Isolda?" I did nothing," Isolda stammered, tears of genuine panic streaming down her flawless porcelain cheeks, ruining her cosmetics. "She is a witch. She has conjured these bastards to steal my throne." In a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to track, Gareth crossed the distance. His massive, gauntleted hand wrapped around Isolda's throat, lifting her effortlessly from the throne. Her feet dangled inches above the stone floor as she clawed desperately at his iron grip. 5 years, Gareth snarled, his face inches from hers, his eyes flashing a dangerous luminous gold. "My wolf has been clawing at my ribs, starving, tearing my mind to shreds, and I thought it was madness. But it was grief. It was mourning the mate I drove away. Tell me what you did." "Gareth, stop!" Rosalind's voice rang out. Gareth froze. His grip loosened just enough for Isolda to draw a ragged, wheezing breath, but he did not drop her. He looked back at Rosalind, his chest heaving. "Do not kill her," Rosalind said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled as she clutched the twins closer. "Death is too quick. I want to hear her confess. I want the entire court to hear how their precious queen was crowned in venom." Isolda sobbed, the regal facade utterly annihilated. The winter roses, she gasped out, choking on her own tears. The bouquet. I went to the blood witches in the Whispering Woods. They gave me a tincture. Hemlock, crushed moonstone, and the blood of a dead wolf. I soaked the stems of Rosalind's bridal bouquet in it. A collective gasp swept through the assembled lords. Kalin's hand dropped to his sword hilt, disgust twisting his weathered features. The scent, Gareth breathed, the horrific realization washing over him. It masked her true scent. It numbed my senses, and the magic amplified yours. I loved you, Isolda shrieked, a desperate, pathetic defense. She only wanted the crown. I wanted you. Gareth dropped her. Isolda crumpled to the stone floor in a heap of ermine and silk, coughing violently. You know nothing of love, Gareth said, his voice dropping to a terrifying deadpan. He looked up at the commander. Kalin, strip her of the royal colors. Confine her to the lowest cell in the black dungeons. She is to have no visitors, no sunlight, and no mercy until I decide her ultimate fate. As the guards dragged a screaming, thrashing Isolda from the hall, Gareth turned back to Rosalind. The fury drained from him, leaving only a hollow, cavernous regret. He descended the stairs, stopping a respectful distance away, his eyes locking onto hers. Rosalind, he whispered, his voice cracking, my true mate. He reached a hand out, the gesture tentative, almost fearful. Rosalind looked at his extended hand, then up into the eyes of the man who had shattered her life. She did not reach back. She pulled Arthur and Lyra closer, her chin lifting with that familiar, aristocratic steel. A mate bond is forged by magic, Gareth, she said coldly, her words echoing loudly in the silent hall. But trust is built in the dirt. I spent 5 years in the dirt. Do not think you can simply reach out and pull me back to the sky. The royal chambers of Stonehelm had been untouched by Isolda. Gareth had refused to let his false queen sleep in the ancestral rooms of the Alpha line, a subconscious rebellion of a wolf that knew its true mate was missing. Now, a massive fire roared in the hearth, casting warm, dancing shadows across the tapestries. Rosalind sat in a high-backed velvet chair, watching the twins. Arthur was asleep on the massive feather bed, exhausted by the day's trauma. Lyra, however, sat cross-legged on the rug, staring intently at the heavy oak doors. He is coming, Lyra whispered, her storm cloud eyes unblinking. A moment later, a soft knock echoed through the room. Rosalind stood, her spine stiffening. Enter. Gareth stepped into the room. He had washed away the grime of the throne room. He wore simple black tunics and breeches, his hair combed back, his beard neatly trimmed. He looked like the man she had loved beneath the hunter's moon, but the sorrow etching his features made him look a decade older. He didn't approach her. He stayed near the door, a massive, powerful man actively shrinking himself to avoid intimidating her. I brought food, he said softly, gesturing to a silver tray he had carried in himself, bypassing the servants. Roast pheasant, fresh bread, and sweet winter berries. Thank you, Rosalind replied, her tone achingly polite. The formal distance between them was a chasm wider than the northern wastes. Gareth set the tray down and knelt by the fire, looking at Lyra. The little girl stared back, utterly fearless. You have my eyes, Gareth murmured, a choked sob catching in his throat. He reached out a trembling hand. Lyra did not flinch. She placed her small, calloused palm against his massive one. Your wolf is sad, the 5-year-old stated, her voice carrying an eerie, ancient resonance. "It has been crying for a very long time." A single tear escaped Gareth's eye, tracking down his cheek. "It missed you. Both of you. And your mother." He looked up at Rosalind. The raw agony in his expression was devastating. "Rosalind, what can I do? Tell me the price of my blindness, and I will pay it in blood or gold or years of my life. I will abdicate the throne if it means I can spend the rest of my days making this right." Rosalind wrapped her arms around herself. The anger had burned out, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion. "You broke me, Gareth. At the altar, in front of the entire realm. You looked at me, carrying your children, and you cast me aside. I was poisoned." "You still made the choice," she fired back, her voice cracking. "Magic clouded your wolf, but the man I loved, looked at my sister and chose her. For 5 years, I sewed until my fingers bled just to buy stale bread. I hid in root cellars. I lived in terror that every hoofbeat was an executioner." Gareth bowed his head, resting his forehead against the cold stone of the hearth. "I know. The guilt will rot my bones until the day I die. But the bond, Rosalind, I feel it pulling at you, just as it pulls at me." "I feel it," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I will not be ruled by it. If I stay, if I allow these children to be your heirs, it will be on my terms, not the wolf's, and not the crown's." "Anything," Gareth swore, looking up, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his gray eyes. "Command me, my queen." Before Rosalind could answer, a frantic, rhythmic pounding echoed from the corridor outside. The heavy doors burst open, revealing Commander Kalin. The veteran warrior was bleeding from a deep gash across his temple, his armor dented. "My king," Kalin gasped, leaning heavily on his sword. "The dungeons. Queen Isolda's loyalists in the guard. They staged a mutiny. She has escaped the cells." Gareth was on his feet in a microsecond, the remorseful father vanishing, replaced instantly by the lethal Alpha. "Secure the perimeter!" Gareth roared. But as he turned toward the door, a chilling, venomous laugh echoed from the balcony behind them. The heavy glass doors of the balcony shattered inward, raining crystalline shards across the opulent rugs. The freezing winter wind howled into the royal chambers, extinguishing the hearth fire in an instant. Standing amidst the broken glass was Isolda. She looked nothing like a queen. Her silken gown was torn and stained with dungeon grime, and her hair was a wild, tangled halo around her face. But it was her eyes that chilled Rosalind to the bone. They were completely black, consumed by the dark magic of the blood witches. In her hand, she held a jagged dagger, dripping with a noxious, glowing green poison. "If I cannot have the crown," Isolda hissed, her voice layered with a demonic, echoing resonance, "then the Alpha line ends tonight." She lunged forward with terrifying, supernatural speed, bypassing Gareth entirely and aiming straight for the bed where Arthur slept. "No!" Rosalind screamed. The seamstress from Oakhaven vanished, replaced by the fierce mother who had survived the wastes. Rosalind didn't wait for Gareth. She drew the silver betrothal dagger from her skirts and threw herself between Isolda and the bed. Isolda's poisoned blade slashed downward. Rosalind brought her dagger up in a desperate parry. The clang of steel rang out, sending sparks flying. The sheer force of Isolda's magically enhanced blow drove Rosalind to her knees, but she held the block, protecting her son. "You were always in my way," Isolda shrieked, pressing her weight down, the glowing green blade inches from Rosalind's face. The perfect sister, the perfect mate. "I survived without the crown," Rosalind gritted out, her muscles screaming under the strain. "You are nothing without it." Suddenly, a deafening, chest-rattling roar shook the very foundations of the keep. Gareth shifted. He didn't just access his alpha aura. His physical form blurred, his bones cracking and reshaping as the massive silver-furred beast of Stonehelm lore manifested in the physical realm. The wolf was a nightmare of muscle and fangs, its eyes burning with pure golden rage. But before the Alpha King could strike, Lyra stepped forward. The 5-year-old girl raised her small hand toward her aunt. She didn't scream. She simply opened her mouth and let out a sound that defied logic, a frequency of pure, concentrated alpha dominance that hit Isolda like a physical battering ram. The dark magic in Isolda's black eyes shattered. She gasped, stumbling backward, dropping her poisoned dagger as the oppressive weight of Lyra's innate power crushed her stolen witch strength. That was all the opening Gareth needed. The massive silver wolf lunged, pinning Isolda to the stone floor. His jaws snapped shut just inches from her throat, his hot breath washing over her terrified face. He didn't bite. He didn't need to. The sheer terror of the beast froze her heart. The mutinous guards who had followed Isolda onto the balcony dropped their weapons instantly, falling to their knees in absolute submission to the true alpha. The room fell deadly silent, save for the howling wind. Gareth shifted back to his human form, naked and chest heaving, his eyes fixed on Rosalind. He grabbed a cloak from a nearby chair, wrapping it around his waist. He looked at Lyra, who simply lowered her hand and walked back to her mother's side. "Kalin," Gareth ordered, his voice cold and final. "Take her. Execution at dawn. No trial. No final words." Isolda didn't scream as she was dragged away. The dark magic had burned her out. She was nothing but a hollow shell. Gareth turned back to Rosalind. She was still kneeling by the bed, her silver dagger resting on her lap, holding both of her children tightly against her chest. She was shaking, but she was unbroken. Slowly, the Alpha King crossed the room. He did not ask for permission this time. He knelt on the floor beside her and wrapped his massive arms around all 3 of them. For the first time in 5 years, Rosalind did not pull away. She buried her face into his chest, inhaling the scent of pine, iron, and the true mate she had lost. The tears finally came, washing away the dirt of Oakhaven, the pain of the altar, and the fear of the shadows. "I have you," Gareth whispered fiercely into her hair, kissing the crown of her head. "I swear on my soul, Rosalind, I will never let you go again." The storm outside finally broke, the howling wind dying down to a gentle breeze. As the first rays of dawn crept over the jagged peaks of the northern wastes, illuminating the royal chambers in a soft, golden light, the Alpha King and his true queen held their children, ready to rebuild a kingdom from the ashes of betrayal. The climax brings all the elements together. Isolda's use of dark magic makes her a formidable physical threat, allowing Rosalind to demonstrate her bravery by physically defending her son. Lyra's use of her inherited alpha power is the ultimate twist. The children are not just heirs, they are the future strength of Stonehelm. The ending is earned. Rosalind doesn't just forgive Gareth because of the bond, but because they fought together to protect their family. The storm has passed, and true love has prevailed. Rosalind Vere went from a discarded bride to the fierce, undeniable Queen of Stonehelm, proving that a mother's love and a true mate's bond can conquer even the darkest of magic. Gareth has his family back, but the work of ruling the northern wastes has just begun. Thank you so much for reading this epic journey of betrayal, survival, and redemption. If you loved Rosalind's strength and the explosive twists of this medieval drama, please hit that like button, share the story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling, high-stakes fantasy romance. Let me know in the comments which moment shocked you the most